Um, there was some new information that came out today with Naledi, and so I wanted to go ahead and come on in and talk about it. I have this as subscriber only because I'm trying to do a couple of lives that are subscriber only comments. And so this is a subscriber only comment channel or chat today. I am over on the YouTube channel as well. It's nwiddaord.com, nwiddaord dot dot dot, same as my username. No, it didn't. Well, it didn't happen, and I don't know what. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Anyways, no. What I was trying to do wasn't happening. So, um, I'm trying to do a couple lives that are subscriber chat only for the subscribers or the people who are subscribing to have that extra content and that extra availability. So this live will be subscriber chat only. It is not a subscriber only live. I am opening it up to everybody so that everybody can see. The Widda Ord dot 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 on YouTube is open and I'm live there. If you are wanting to comment and not wanting to subscribe, you're more than welcome to go over there and comment over there. It is open for comments. Just it's a little bit of an extra step. But we're going to go ahead and talk about Homo naledi tonight and the newest finds that are finding out of the cave in Africa. Yeah. So we're going to talk about Lee Berger had said when he published, I think it was 6 months ago now, when he published the newer finds on Naledi and Homo naledi's burial of dead, that he had a couple of more finds that were going to come out over the next year. And then when those couple of more finds come out over the next year, that those couple of more finds are going to give just a deeper understanding of the species and our own space within history. And so this is going to be one of those things. There's actually evidence currently that Naledi not only do the shelf burials that we have known are that had come out like 6 months ago, but are also using symbolism on cave walls and carving symbolism on cave walls. That for me is one of those things that really pops us up in this understanding of who we are in this scheme, where we're at in the ebb and flow of human life and the ebb and flow of life in general. We like so frequently to think that we are the pinnacle, that we are the greatest, that nothing like us happened before, that we're unique, that we're it, that we're only. And yet, as we look, we see that the earth has always needed tenders for her biome. The earth has always needed tenders for her home. And while we have certain things that are unique currently, they haven't always been unique. And having those beautiful in-depth connections to the biome have always been a part of being a part of the biome. So that in itself is one of those fantastic things that really just pulls us up and out. Because that prior thought process that we've dealt with throughout history, throughout written thought, throughout humanity's understanding of self has been very self-centric and very I am pinnacle, I am the best, I am the all. And these understandings bring that forward, that that's not a truth, that's not a fact, that's not something that can be quantified, and it's not objective. So when we're looking at objectivity, we're looking at things that are weighed in evidence. We're looking at things that have the least amount of bias that you can. And when we're looking at things that have the least amount of bias that you can, when we're looking at that level of objectivity, we're seeing that we as another member of the family Mammalia, another member of the animal family, have some very beautiful interactions with the biome that we are meant to partake in and meant to be a part of. Those beautiful interactions with the biome that we are meant to partake in and meant to be a part in have been kind of set aside by us. That return to those beautiful interactions within the biome, that space that we were meant to be a part of, only uplifts the biome. We are not unique in that ability. We are the current in that ability. And Homo naledi really shows us that on a scale that we can see. It's unlikely that concrete is going to last 2 million, 10 million years, 200 million years. It's unlikely that all of the things that we think of as permanent because they've lasted a few millennia are going to be gone in a few more millennia, especially if we consider the track that we are on, if we are moving forward currently on the track that we are on. When we look back through the history of the planet, when we look back through the understanding of, layers and strata within the planet and how many different species lived and different timelines and everything else, when we look back at those things, we have to understand that only certain things survive. Only certain things are still here. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, and the idea that we are the singular, the only that's ever really done this level of understanding is very narrow-minded. It is very self-centric and self-important. As people are starting to look through a non-self-important lens, a non-Western thought that places humanity as a pinnacle lens, you see that this movement forward absolutely takes and changes and adapts our understanding of humanity, because each step that they're making, they're finding information that we would have thought impossible. They're finding civilization and understanding, even in the methods that we really tend to think of them as, I personally feel. When we look at whether or not we're ever going to be able to tell whether or not certain peoples like Erectus, if we're ever going to find a canoe by Erectus, if we're ever going to find a possibility of how Erectus made it across water. We've talked about the fact that the biodegrading of plant life, the biodegrading of the life around you is really, it doesn't last long, right? Like it destroys fast. So we're most likely never going to find a canoe from Homo erectus. I think that they have found evidence of like very narrow scrap pieces of evidence of boat objects about 20,000 years ago, I think is the current oldest one that I personally know of, and that's in Japan, right? When we're looking at these things, it's only when the biome comes together in this perfect convergence that we find these things, because the archaeological record, the record of humanity's past, the record of life on this planet is very biased. It gets rid of certain things faster than others. It really, this is why we now bury in a steel casket instead of a pine box, right? It really takes back into itself anything that's really organic. So finding that knowledge of that taking back into itself anything that's really organic, you can understand that any houses that were built 20,000 years ago are very unlikely to be seen in great evidence in the archaeological record. Any house structures that are going to be built 40,000 years ago, 60,000 years ago, 80,000 years ago, a million years ago are not going to be seen very likely in the archaeological record. And if anything is seen, what will be seen is things like And this is even if, like, this is a huge if, but if somebody were laying out stones in the desert and making lines, and then we come along later and go, oh, those stone lines in the desert. But by millions of years ago, you're getting down into archaeological layers. So maybe with the topographical mapping that we have today, that's like LIDAR that goes through the ground, that might give us things like that from 2 million years ago. When I'm digging, I'm disturbing that though, right? So if it's something where it's a dig, if it's something prior to LIDAR and that capability, you're not really catching it. And you're not even really catching it most of the time at 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago. So when we look at these prior species and we have this very thin understanding of who they were and what they have done, we can see that our understanding of who they were and what they're doing, excuse me, is really based on our idea of what primitive is and what capability is. Um, our idea of what civilization means versus primitive or barbarian, right? Our idea that the pinnacle is living in ticky-tacky boxes everywhere and, driving cars and destroying the planet, right? So this very narrow perspective of what pinnacle is that oftentimes ignores the pinnacles that have been there throughout the past. Pinnacles that we have record of, but pinnacles that we have discarded as not being pinnacles because our Western thought eyes did not see them that way. When we look at anything in academia, archaeology, the sciences, um, really anything on the you have to put some thought into it kind of level, we see that it is very Western thought organized. It is becoming less Western thought organized. There is a lot more influence from the East. There's a lot more influence from the actual West instead of like the Near East. Um, and there's a lot more influence from the South coming in, right? And when we see that those influences are coming in, we see that those influences coming in, some of them never having been lost, really open up the Western idea of thought that was very narrow and closed for a couple of 100 years, right? Because it had been eradicated for about 1,000. So when we're now looking at things like the archaeological record through different eyes, through eyes that have a different perspective, we're starting to see things like when we were talking recently about Neanderthals possibly having a writing system because of what we're seeing with the cave art within Neanderthals, right? Or there's a lunar pathway on bone, like a calendar on bone that's like 50,000, 40,000 years ago in an area that, to our knowledge, sapien wasn't in yet. So this would be another Neanderthal thing. When we're looking at these shifts, we keep wanting to contain them and contribute them within us. Contain them and contribute them in our timeline, contain them and contribute them to our interaction with Neanderthals, our interaction with these other species, contain them and contribute them to us, because again, we have this very self-centric identity, it seems. So when we're looking at that, it's been harder to see things come across like what's coming across with Naledi. It's been harder to understand them and see them, A, for what they are instead of for what they might be, or instead of what they couldn't possibly be, is the better way to say that. And B, to really accept them on a broader sense, to really understand on a broader sense that these possibilities are there, because for so long we've had the idea that these possibilities really aren't there. So this latest news with the Naledi coming out shows that Naledi not only were placing their dead on shelves and revisiting those graves, which was the information that Lee Berger brought out about 6 months ago. Also, they were burying in actual burials, like as in dig a hole in the ground and place the body in and cover the body. They were marking those burials, and then they have markings that they are doing on walls. They are carving into cave walls in a form of cave art. Again, Naledi's time on the planet is 335,000 years to 235,000 years ago. This is roughly the 100 years 35,000 before our belief of when sapien comes onto the scene, and 65,000 after sapien comes onto the scene in roughly the same area. So this is a species in this area that actually gets this capacity and understanding way faster than we did. We currently don't believe that Homo sapien really converges. Okay, so this is the new one on Homo sapien, is that they don't believe Homo sapien really converges into a singular species, instead of two kind of unique species of Homo sapien coming together from several different groups of Heidelbergensis and Erectus and things like that, and these distinctly unique human groups forming. So they don't believe that we're solidly us until 150,000 years ago, and they don't believe that we get the brain capacity, not the brain capacity, the brain shape that we get until 30 to 40,000 years ago. Current belief states that the brain shape that we have is what actually gives us the malleability of the brain and gives us this sense of identity and gives us this fast firing of synapses, is how they term it. And I don't, to me, it's the quickness of thought, right? So when we look at that, we see that Neanderthal develops that alongside us, and then Neanderthal has gone into us. So they don't fully get to the shape that we have. But we see that we have thought, well, if you have a large brain, that means that the brain size is the capacity of understanding. The larger the brain in comparison to the body, then the smarter the being is. And now we even tend to kind of overemphasize that as sapien, though we don't really believe that that's sapien. But we know that Neanderthal has a larger brain capacity by roughly 100 cubic centimeters on average. And we know that Homo erectus has a larger size brain, but not larger than us. But when we look at Homo naledi, we see that Homo naledi is smaller brained, whereas Erectus is fully upright, fully what we think of as modern human, with the exception of some different curvature of bones and different kind of placements and a little, skull structure morphology. We're seeing that that translates down into the subspecies of Homo erectus is roughly the same. That it's really the same as what we are, except for there's a few different bones in the body. Sometimes it's different shapes of hands. Sometimes it's different ways that the feet arch. Often it is different ways that the skull shapes. And we see this of all the Homo species. What we see with Naledi is that Naledi really has the body of Erectus from the L spine down, that fully bipedal, expediently bipedal lower body, but it does not have that from the L spine up. What it has is this reversion to roughly 3 million years ago with Lucy, Australopithecine. So this kind of shuffle back, and we've talked in here before about how that shows this level of how that shows that evolution itself is not linear, that it can go forward and back and stay in one shape and space at the same time. And we've talked that the forward step that we see with Naledi, and how we see Naledi as this proof that evolution isn't linear. When we see that lower body that is a Homo erectus, and so very much the same as it is at the time. And then we see the upper body that is Australopithecine, and therefore has that 3 million year old reversion. We see that the brain capacity, not the brain capacity, the brain shape with Homo naledi is this leap forward until where we are at now. And again, we don't get this shape ourselves until 30,000 years ago. At the bottom end, 40 to 30,000 years ago is where they're stating. And we don't see a start of change in our understanding of interaction with the world around us, like cave art and burial of the dead and clothing, not clothing, but decorative objects on the body, like shells and stuff like that. We don't start to see that until like 90,000 years ago in Neanderthal, and roughly, I think, 80, 70,000 years ago in sapien. So when we start to understand that, for all intents and purposes, even if we go with the high end, 80,000 years ago is when Homo erectus starts to behave mainly in the way that Homo erectus behaves now, with the way its brain behaves, right? Or not Homo erectus, Homo sapien. when we look at Naledi, that puts us like 200 years prior, 200,000 years prior, sorry, 200,000 years prior to that. This is this understanding that a species that we're not seeing elsewhere in the archaeological records, like we're not sure right now, we only have 100-year timeline for them. This is because this is the bodies that we're finding. It's possible that they are actually from an earlier, or they've been around a little bit longer, but we haven't found the bodies before because this is when they start burying their dead. Though I would tell you that if they start burying their dead 100,000 years before they die, and we started burying our dead 80,000 years ago, what does that say about us, right? That is a possibility. They're most likely not developing exactly as that species anyways. It's going to go through some changes and some steps forward anyways. So absolutely, we're not exactly sure where the changes and the steps, like, is it coming to us from Erectus? Is it coming to us from, Erectus and Australopithecine intermixing? Erectus and Paranthropus boisei live in the same encampments early on. So do habilis along with them. So if these are all living together, is this another species? Paranthropus boisei is the same timeline as Lucy. Is Lucy coming in? Is Australopithecine coming into play? And that's where we get Erectus or Naledi down the line. I think for me that one of the significant parts about this that is coming across, I'm hoping that it ends up coming across in the right way, is the fact that there are cross hatches. Our pound sign is what we call it now. Our hashtag is what we call it now. Pound sign. I'm fucking old. But the hashtag. If you're looking up, and I posted an article on the widdaord.com site underneath the bibliographies for Naledi. I posted an article on this. But if you're looking at the art from those articles, this will give you a start. It's just a singular article. There are several articles. They all really repeat the same thing. This is a Scientific American. It's pretty decent. CNN did a video. I don't like posting videos up there. There's a couple of different places, and you can absolutely pull up a lot of information right now on this. But if you're looking at the wall art, what you're seeing is kind of this, well, not even kind of, what you're seeing is a hashtag. For me, this indicates an easy carve for a marking. We're not seeing in this early carving, or at least in the carving that I'm seeing, anything that is really, this represents an animal. This represents a human. This represents a vagina, like we see the triangular, in some cases, very obviously vagina markings in Neanderthal caves, right? It's not looking like there's any markings that signify anything in specific. So I would not believe that the signifier for the hashtag or the hash mark is absolutely, I'm going to say it wrong for the rest of the live. I just have to say that. For the hashtag is actually incorrect or actually related to anything, right? What it would be to me is you are at this point of time, now I believe from what I did read, because I've read through a couple of articles and gotten a couple of different takes. I believe that what I did read was that they're in correlation with near where the burials are, the actual burials. Whereas before we saw with the shelves and the shelf layouts and the bodies laid out on shelves that they are doing fire in those areas. Now we're seeing that this might be in correlation with the actual underground burials, not underground, under cave floor burial. To me, this is a marker. This is it's easy to carve a straight line in the wall. I want to make sure that it's more than one straight line, because if it's only one straight line, I might confuse it with some of the other marks. If it's only two straight lines, I might confuse it with something down the wall in the cave, 100 meters back that, was where the way the cave wall kind of rolled weird, right? Or an old break or something like that. So I'm going to carve a cross hatch so that I can actually know for certain that's not something that you see in nature. That's not something that the earth itself does. I can know for certain this is where I buried my dead. So I think when we look at that, this is not the example of art that we're thinking of. It is absolutely an example of marking, though. It is absolutely an example of not I was here, like runes sometimes are. Instead, here they lie. Here is this person, so I can come back and revisit this. Here is this person, so I can be a part of this. It'll be interesting to see. I'm going to wait and actually listen to what Lee has to say in a couple of days. Um, all of the articles talked about stuff that he's released, but I haven't seen him actually speaking yet, which is what happened the last time too. It's going to be interesting after that to see exactly what the layout is and what the play out is. I'm hoping that when we see what that layout and play out is, that it gives us just a broader understanding yet again of where we're at, and just a broader understanding again of where Naledi is kind of showing us up a little bit, like, and not like that. Uh, Yet showing us that we are not the pinnacle, that we are not the greatest that ever, we are not the top of the line, that we are instead just another part of the biome, instead just another part of the tenders that the earth creates to make sure that her biome is tended. People like to talk about understanding that God is in them and that they are a part of God. When you can look at the biome as God, when you can look at the biome as the creator or the higher power or the mother, you can see better that thought process of I am her and she is me, or I am it and it is me. And I say that because I know there are a lot of people who really believe in that thought process, that we are this pinnacle and that this is a gift given to us for us to destroy. Even in that, we have this understanding that we are not alone in this world. This understanding that we're not alone in this world seems to translate at some point to it being A, something above, and B, something not necessarily in control all the time, though mainly in control. And also just like us, right? That anamorphism comes in, that idea that the deity must be represented in us, and that we must appear to be the deity and the deity must appear us, right? When we look at that and take away that self-centric that we were just talking about a couple minutes ago, we can see that seeing the world shape around us as being a part of us is not only beneficial to the world shape around us, but beneficial to us. And that it makes more sense. It's more logical. It fits along the pathways of those known things that we have in a way that blind doesn't, right? In a way that other things do not. And so for me, I've always over analytical and over logical. Uh, even in my faith, I'm always over analytical and over logical. And so for me, when we can see that, it really gives us a greater understanding. But when we look at things like this movement with Homo Naledi, what we're seeing with this movement with Homo Naledi is that really at least 30,000 years before we come on this scene, and roughly 80,000 years before we coalesce into the species that we currently are, and 200,000 years before we start becoming the artist and identity that we are, and 300,000 years before we get to the shape of our brain. Homo Naledi has that shape of our brain and sings to the earth in a way and understands identity in a way that we took a long time to get to on the understanding of identity and seem to have lost in the singing of the earth. I think that as more and more information comes out, we're going to see more and more that these other species of human and these other species of hominin around us have always maintained a level of civilization more civilized than the level of civilization we are in now. And by that, I mean civil as in civil to each other, right? Taking care of each other. But I also mean technologically advanced. I do not mean having laptops and having computers, but I do mean having an understanding of nature combined with an understanding of how to create a biome and how to create a home and how to really get together in that enough that gives this forward movement, enough that gives this more idyllic thought process and more idyllic space than we're in now. We see that a lot of indigenous cultures across the globe are still able to live in that kind of connection. And we see that indigenous cultures in almost all space, when found as indigenous cultures or when colonized as indigenous cultures, were seen to have advanced structures and advanced societies clear across the globe. To me, this advanced structure and this advanced society stems back further than even us. We just don't see it in the archaeological record, because if I build a lean-to out of sticks and branches and put, a tarp of animal fur over it, you're not going to see it in the archaeological record. If I build a wooden house, you are not going to see it in the archaeological record in 40,000 years, unless you're using LiDAR, and that's still a maybe. We have to understand that just because we don't think that it happened, and just because we can't perceive of it happening, and just because it doesn't happen in the way that we believe it's supposed to happen, does not mean that we are unique, and does not mean that this is ours to destroy. I'll go ahead and open it up for a couple, and then I'm probably going to, I want to get any questions on Naledi and the newer stuff. And then I'm probably going to go, because I'm going to stream, or not stream, I'm going to work on some drawings and some artwork. But I'll go ahead and open it up for people who are not subscribers to comment, so that I can take any questions that have, or, any questions of relevance or anything that needed to be answered. And I'll probably do more on Naledi tomorrow. I was really busy and had a lot going on today. I was going to come in today, and just life snowballed on me. I think that when we're looking at humans, it becomes this very amazing understanding of connection as we truly look. I think that that connection goes back to the very first mammals. I think that that's important in not only who we are, but how we move forward. And I feel that, or I believe that it is that loss that has actually put us in the really dire straits that we're in now. So it's really amazing and beautiful to me when I see things like this, and the Naledi finds, because I think that it can really open up people's eyes to an understanding that most people don't really want to have. Most people really have this idea that, unless we are the pinnacle, then we're not important. And I kind of feel like it ignores the importance of everything else in the world, right? Like, if you look around, everything else, it's all important. Water's important, air's important. Is it a pinnacle? It's, like, if we're the pinnacle, then it can't be. And yet it's still important, and yet it still matters, and yet it still has something that is of value. We can really see this understanding that value can be found in so many different spaces and ways so early on in even us. So I think it's important to look at. I'm going to go ahead and go. I hope that everybody has a great night, and I'll be on probably in the morning tomorrow. But I'm getting overheated, and like I said, it's been kind of a long day. So have a great one. Thank you very much, everybody.